You're live.
Okay, we are live. Welcome, everybody. We're glad you could take the time to join us today. I want to show you a book that I have right here, A Lady in France, and I'm very, very honored to have the author of this book, Jennie. And Jennie, please, you're going to have to pronounce your last name for us.
Okay, I need my husband for that to do it really well, but it's Goutet. Goutet. He said it's like lait, milk, lait. Because if you say goûter, it means snack. So I don't know if you can hear the difference between goûter and goûter. But anyway, it's goûter. Good luck with that.
I'm glad you're pronouncing it, not me. I'm just going to say Jennie or A Lady in France. So, let's get into the questions because I've been very excited to be able to, I enjoyed the book, obviously, and I've been very excited to ask you some questions about it, and I know there's some folks that will be watching today and in the future that probably are going to enjoy learning a little bit more about you in the book as well. So let's talk about how long have you been writing and kind of what got you into writing it in the first place?
Okay, I have tried writing before. When I was living in Africa, actually I wrote about 10 chapters of a book, but there was no plot. It was really boring. So I said, okay, that's it. I'm not a writer. And about 4.5 years ago, I started blogging, and that gave me courage because I would just write a small post, and I could kind of craft it the way I wanted to without getting overwhelmed in plot details and everything. But when I actually started my book, it was saved in a file folder called Final Attempt, because I said, if I cannot write this darn book, then that's it. I'm officially hanging up my writer's hat. I'm done. So I would say really writing 4.5 years, ever since I've been blogging.
Okay, and that's how this memoir came about. What made you decide I want to write a little bit about my story and get that organized into a book?
Okay, I had a few people leave me comments, quite a few actually, over the years, saying, when they would hear about my stay in Africa and all of that, oh, you should really write a book, you should write a memoir, and I never really took it seriously because I thought, I can't put together something as big as that. I can only do maybe a 500-word post. And then I lost the baby. I had a miscarriage, and that was kind of the pivotal point. It was like suddenly I felt like I really did have something to say, and what I had to say was my walk with God before I became a Christian, my walk with God as a Christian, the difficult things and how I dealt with all of them. And it was really when that happened to me that I thought, okay, I have something to say, and I have something important to say. And it's interesting because the first draft was finished about the time the baby would have been born. So I felt like I kind of gave birth to a book instead of a baby. So that's what prompted it.
Okay, that's I can see that's very interesting. Now, how would you summarize A Lady in France for someone who hasn't ever read it?
Okay, I wanted it to be not too spiritual, not too faith-based, that anybody could relate to it. And I do have friends that are atheists or a different religion, and they've liked it. It hasn't turned them off or anything. But it really is a story about somebody's walk with God. I mean, that's, there's just no way of escaping it. The first part is about, everything I went through before I became a Christian and kind of all of the ways that God called me. The second part, because it's divided into 3 parts, and the second part is it's about becoming a Christian and all of the difficulties that happen when we're young Christian, very zealous, a lot of character things to work through. And then the third part was me more mature in my faith, but still having to deal with the things that we all have to deal with. And in this case, it was a miscarriage. So to summarize my book, it's just about dealing with God in the nitty-gritty, going through Him with the highs and the lows, the difficult, the joyful, and my relationship with God.
Well, that's what I found was so interesting, is that you had written a book that was so interesting about life, and yet it showed God's hand in your life, but not in a preachy kind of. It was just a real way. That's really what drew me in, I guess I could say, to start. Let's go back to the beginning of the book, and I'm curious, what causes a young college girl from the Midwest, us Midwesterners, I never even saw the ocean until I joined the Marine Corps. All we usually ever want to do is go to Florida or something to see the ocean. That's a big trip. What caused you to want to go all the way around the world and teach English in Thailand?
Okay. Well, first of all, we did have my parents were really great at introducing us to other cultures through different foods. We adopted my sister, who is Korean. We had an Indian woman staying at our house while she was studying, and we just had my parents always made a point to introduce us to other cultures. So it wasn't that shocking, even though I was the first person. Actually, my mother did travel to Europe when I was in high school, but I was really the first person that kind of went out there and did something like that. But I think I was just afraid of being ordinary. You know, I couldn't imagine leaving college and getting a job and just kind of getting married, and I was afraid that I would be ordinary, and so I pushed myself to go, and that's really what the motivating factor was.
Well, that's interesting, because it sounds like, you know, that's a very outgoing, adventurous type person, and you talk about your pride and your confidence, and then at the same time you've got the depression and the anxiety. And so how does an adventurous, you know, a girl that will go all the way across the world and has that kind of confidence, yet how does that depression and all that coexist inside?
Yeah, okay. It's funny, I always joke that I can, you know, move to another country, even a third world country, in a heartbeat, but don't make me leave my house at night to meet somebody for the movies, because I'm too much of a homebody. So I don't know, actually. I don't know why I can do something crazy like go to another country but have trouble leaving my house, you know. I think at that time my desire to do something great and to become somebody that I thought would be worthy. I guess I didn't have a lot of self-esteem. Somebody that I thought would be worthy was greater than my fear and my depression. So I kind of just wrestled it to the ground. I said, I'm doing this. It doesn't matter how I feel. So it's true. It's a very strange coexistence between the two, but you know, I wasn't going to let it get me down. That's how I felt.
Well, and I think most people we all deal with confidence on one side and insecurity on the other, and sometimes it seems like the most confident, maybe prideful, outgoing people really are quietly insecure, just they don't let anybody know it.
Yes.
Now, I have to ask you, what really drew me at the very beginning, the only reason I picked up your book was because you were such a great descriptive writer. How did you learn how to describe emotions and surroundings and paint on the barn? I mean, when I read it, I just feel like I'm there with you looking at it. How did you learn to do that?
Well, it didn't come easily. I think personality-wise, I am rather expressive and passionate, and so I guess it's not that surprising that it comes out in written form. But when I first submitted my rough draft to some friends, you know, the first person, Julie, she read it and she was so encouraging. She said it's a great story and everything, and she gave me some tips and everything, but she didn't kind of knock it to the ground as she should have. And when I submitted it to my friend Leslie, she said, you can do better. There's no sensory descriptions in here. So I just feel like it's a list of what you did. You know, I want to be there. And I was like, sensory description? What's that? You know? So I went back and I, you know, started all over again, and I added, it was like I had a skeleton and I had to keep adding flesh, you know, and just added and added and added and edited and edited, and finally I got something that I was happy with. And I think it helped that I grew up, this was my mother's influence, I grew up reading a lot of classical writers, Dostoevsky, Dickens, Austen, and I think that must have seeped in somehow, but I really had to learn how to do it. It was not innate.
Well, I think you must have gotten it down perfectly, because I enjoyed it and thought it was very, very descriptive.
Thank you.
Now I want to look a little bit at when you had God calling you, and you described several of these encounters, and I'm just wondering, why do you think you finally said yes? The reason I ask that is it seems like maybe in my life and others, it takes troubles or a really traumatic event, but it just seemed like you didn't have any real big trouble. But what caused you to finally say yes?
Well, I do think I suffered a lot. The traveling and then losing my brother was very, very, very heartbreaking for me. So I think I would not have even sought out God if I had not been humbled, that's for sure. But I think what finally caused me to say yes was actually His love. I read the Bible and it just kind of came to life in 3D full color. I was like, wow, I had no idea it was this alive. I thought it was just this dry, archaic piece of literature. And when I read it, so I kind of got to know Jesus' heart that way. And I would say that that is what, it was the intense sadness and depression that caused me to seek Him out, but it was the love and the power of the Word that caused me to say yes.
Now, what would you say was the hardest thing about surrendering to Christ as far as changes you had to make in your lifestyle?
It was hard to give up my boyfriend at the time. I was dating a French guy, and I had this dream that I was going to marry a French guy, and so, I was set on him. And that was hard. But I think the hardest thing was to become kind of a Bible thumper. It's like, that just was so not me, Here I was trying to become sophisticated, that's what I was traveling all over so I could get sophistication. And instead I got Jesus, I never pictured myself living that out, but that was probably the hardest thing to surrender and to just not be ashamed of who I was as a Christian. It's still a battle for me, but it's easier now.
Okay, now you write about the challenges of purity in the book once you became a Christian. What advice would you give to parents raising teenagers today, and maybe especially advice to young ladies who are facing this challenge on the front lines?
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. It does help a lot to have role models. When I was studying the Bible in New York City, I saw all these amazing people, men and women, that had made purity their standard until marriage. And I thought, wow, if these people can do it, then I can do it. I just thought that they were so cool, like sharp, successful, and everything. So it does help to have role models. I think as parents, we're not there yet. My oldest is 10, so I could be eating my words. We'll see. But you know better than I am. Your children are grown, at least some of them. But I think that the best thing that parents could do is to talk about it. I went to a very formal church growing up, and I don't remember ever hearing that was a standard. Ever, and I still remember talking to a pastor once, and I said, yeah, but nobody does that, what? And he's like, well, they're supposed to, so that was a big shock for me. So I think you actually have to talk about it in an inspiring way. But I think on the flip side, it's important for parents to be super non-judgmental. I think if the children see their parents, helping a teen mom, loving and treating people who live a homosexual lifestyle the same as they would anybody else, really respecting people as in their walk with God, I think that does a lot for purity. It took me 4 times to be called by God, and I was not anywhere near that, and it would not have been the person that was beating it down my throat that would have helped me. So I think tons of grace on the part of parents, tons of love, and speaking about it in a way that's inspiring. That's from my not there yet parenting advice. We'll see how well that holds true.
Well, I think it's great advice. I was very fortunate to have some great daughters, and it's just a tough thing, and yeah. I think you're right, talking about it in an honest way, and of course setting a good example also, and seeing other people and being at a church where the people do have that standard. I think all those things are right on. Yeah. You also talked about how you kind of stumbled into I guess it was an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, but you kind of stumbled into that and all of a sudden left thinking maybe you had a drinking problem. You never did say if you totally have quit drinking, But are you a drinker, and is that something that you quit? And did you have a problem with drinking?
Okay, yeah. Sometimes after our church split up, because this program was done through our church, and there was a strong culture. I mean, our church, one of the reasons we had problems was because there was such a strong culture of control, enforcing righteousness, and that extended over into the chemical recovery program. And so I did kind of toy with the idea when the church sort of fell to pieces and we had to build it back up again, is this something that I'm feeling pressure from the chemical recovery group? Because when you go through that group, that's it. For life, you're done. You agree to not ever touch alcohol again. And I thought about that, is this really my issue or not? And, it's when I kind of get stressed, I could picture myself sort of going into a bar, or I could picture myself, pouring wine and then pouring another. So I decided my relationship with God it hinges on my sobriety. So I would say yes, and I haven't had a drink ever since then. Once I joined the program, I stopped. A couple of years ago, we started tasting this non-alcoholic wine, and at first I felt so guilty, just the fact that it was in the shape of a bottle and everything, but it's alcohol-free wine. Now I drink that without a problem. I don't feel guilty about it, and it might taste a little bit like vinegar. I don't recommend it to a wine aficionado, or however you pronounce that word, but it's just fine for me. It's better than grape juice, but I still don't drink.
Now that's got to be tough living in France, right? I mean,
yes.
That's where everybody wine's like the beverage of choice for every meal, isn't it?
Yes, you have. I mean, except for breakfast, wine and water is what you get at the table. So it is difficult. It helps that my husband does not drink. He's 100% on my side. He does not drink, and I just love that. I mean, I cannot imagine a better support. So I really don't feel alone. Sometimes I feel a little stupid because people come over and we don't know them that well. They always bring wine, and they're kind of shocked that we don't drink wine. It's a little embarrassing, but it's the price to pay. So yeah, no wine.
Now, you talk about your trip to Africa, your mission trip there, and it just sounded horrendous. I mean, it just seemed like it was miserable, and it was hard for me to see what you really accomplished there. And so I was going to ask you, what did you accomplish, and what do you think was the biggest lesson you and your husband took away from your time in Africa?
Yeah, it's true that a lot of Africa was spent doing nothing. In Djibouti, we were waiting for the government to approve us, and right when they approved us, 9/11 happened, and we got evacuated. Then we went to Kenya, and we were only supposed to be there a couple of weeks, and it turned into 4 months. So we didn't get involved in much while we were there. So it's true. However, the 5 months that we spent in Hargeisa, which is the capital city of Somaliland, it's linked to Somalia, which most people have heard of, but they're self-declared independent and peaceful. And the 5 months that we spent there were very, very busy and beneficial. But I think if I did nothing more, if I spent a whole year in Africa and sat in my house every single day, except for that one morning when I held the baby who died, the day that he died. I had been taking care of him, and his name was Moge, which means he doesn't know his father. And he was very sick, and I've been taking care of him. And I brought him to the hospital. We tried to do stuff for him, and I held him all morning. And then when it was time to go for lunch, I handed him over, really not thinking that this was it. I was really in denial. And as soon as I handed him over, he convulsed, and he died. And then I carried his body back to the orphanage to be buried. And I think if I did nothing else, if I just sat in my house for 364 days and did that one thing, then Africa was worth it, because I was perhaps, quite possibly, the only person who had ever loved him on earth. So that means a lot to me in any case.
Yeah, wow. That was the really, I mean, that definitely, tugs at your heartstrings, that particular story, when you told it in the book as well. Yeah. Now I want to go back a little bit, backtrack, I guess. You you mentioned you were, at one point, I can't remember how you said it, but you were very proud of how good of a teacher you were, how the kids responded. And it was clear that, of course, you know, I'm an old Marine, so you had it disciplined out and everything else. I'm just wondering, what kept you from ever going back to teaching when you came back to America and you were struggling to find a job? Knowing that you were such a good teacher, why didn't you just jump into that?
I think that I don't have enough. I can do it, but I don't enjoy it. I kind of got into a groove in Taiwan and everything like that, and there was enough other things to keep me interested. And I know I can do it, and I can make sure that those kids are loved and well cared for. But I don't know if I'm too selfish, but I'm kind of an introvert, even though my mother totally doesn't agree with that. But I like to be by myself. I just didn't want to do that, So, and I actually teach now. I teach classes in my home to earn some extra money. I teach English. I teach at a local high school. I tutor English, critical writing and everything like that, which is kind of a joke because I always had so much trouble writing a critical essay. So I do teach, but I would love to be able to not have to teach and to write full-time. That would be great.
Well, I would think you'd be a good writing teacher, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Now I want to ask kind of a personal question, because this subject of depression comes up and the medication for depression, and honestly, being a Marine and my dad raised me kind of tough, I don't really understand the depression thing. I mean, I've had bad days and you just kind of have to buck through it. So when you hear about these people that get depressed, it almost, to me, it's like, how does that happen? So could you explain a little bit the depression, and something I'm curious of, how does this, because you hear about this medication people take and you never understand it, but you seem to describe in your book that it really made a difference and really helped you kind of, get happier, I guess you could say.
Well, from my non-medical voice of authority, all of us have a certain level of serotonin, which is the feel-good hormone. I think it's a hormone in our body. All of us have it. And somebody who's depressed, that gets depleted. The level goes down. And all the medicine does is to raise it back up to a normal level. So in a way, it's just putting back what the body is supposed to have. But, depression, you cannot explain why you're depressed. When I went off the medicine, I don't remember if I talked about this. I think I talked about it very briefly in the book, but
yeah, right. You were saved for a couple of years. Yeah.
Yes, for just a couple of years, and at the time when it should have been the happiest, because I started dating Mathieu, that's when I had to start taking medicine again, and I was just, I could not function. And so there are two types. I mean, there are situational depression, when something happens and you just can't seem to overcome it, and that's one thing that doesn't necessarily need medicine. But when it's a chemical depression, it just means that your natural levels are too low and you need to kind of beef them back up again. So I'm an advocate, and I think that's a sensitive topic for Christians. Some people feel like, you should not be depressed if you're in Christ. But I've seen a lot of examples in the Bible where it was a righteous thing to take the prescribed medicine to heal. So I don't really see this as any different. And why suffer if you can function normally? I mean, I'm very happy that I can take medicine and that I can be there for my children. And they will get happy most of the time, well-adjusted, reasonable mother instead of somebody that's completely catatonic. And, so for me, I'm pro-medicine if you need it.
Well, it helped me have a little better understanding of it, because I wasn't looking at it from the Christian perspective. It's just from the Marine perspective of, hey, buck up and make it happen. You can't, this depression is not real.
Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you again, you talked about the babies, and what's the word for the after you get depressed, after a lady has a baby, what is that?
It's called postpartum depression.
Yes,
postpartum depression.
How do you got any advice on how a lady can overcome that? And then for guys like me, is there anything that a guy can do to help with that or to lessen that or anything? What any advice on that front?
I think, let me go with the guy thing, because what to do to help the guy. I think the guy should not freak out if his wife suddenly flips a switch, because honestly, the hormones are all over the place. Even if you don't normally struggle with depression, that can totally flip a switch. So I think the husbands they cannot freak out when they see their wife turn to somebody else. And I think also the most important thing is that one, and this is something that my psychiatrist and OBGYN talked to me about, because they knew my history with depression. When you start to have thoughts of self-harming or harming the baby, or you're afraid you're going to harm the baby, these are normal. And I know people that were just, too afraid to talk about them because they thought that their baby would be taken away. If a husband hears that his wife is having thoughts of harming the baby, don't freak out. Just get her help. It's just postpartum depression. It doesn't mean that she's a psycho mom or it's going to happen. I think just don't freak out. How many times have I said that? I think that's the most important thing. And just to really be supportive, get the person help. There are local groups for postpartum depression. Call the groups. Let the guy do the calling, and get that person over here. Get the people who are qualified to help over to help the wife. I think that's probably the best advice I can give. It's the most loving thing to do, and she'll be fine. A lot of times they can get through it without taking medicine. Sometimes it's necessary, but a lot of times they really need to at least talk to somebody who knows what it's about.
Okay. And now I want to talk about your church a little bit. It sounds like such a wonderful church, such a great way to grow closer to the Lord. I'd like you to tell a little bit about the church, because I think readers would find that interesting, as well as you talk about some of the troubles that went through. And I'd like you to maybe explain, because I think it's important for all Christians to understand that churches aren't perfect. And how did you deal with when you found out your church wasn't perfect as a new Christian, and you stayed faithful and didn't let that get you off track?
Yeah, it was a big shock when our church split up, because because I had idolized the church. A lot of people left the church. Okay, so I go to the International Churches of Christ, and it's kind of an offshoot of the mainline Churches of Christ, which which have been around since I think the 1800s. And it was a great church. Even back then, it was a great church. It was well organized, very dynamic. Obviously a lot of people were getting baptized because there were people reaching out to other people, and it was just fantastic. However, the way that it was set up, like I mentioned before, there was kind of a control over righteousness. Like, you can't deviate. You have to sort of conform to my standard of what the Bible says about righteousness. And people don't fit into boxes. So that didn't work. And there was a huge blowout. A lot of people left. It's a cult, and we probably did have some cultish practices, but not so much that there was absolutely nobody left when it blew up. A lot of us had our own convictions that had nothing to do with the church, but it was pretty traumatizing to have that happen. People that you never imagined would leave, were leaving, and it was just really crazy. And people that you never imagined would stay were staying. I mean, that was the other ironic thing. I think you just never know what type of person is going to respond to what type of church. The way I looked at it is, I would rather go to this church where they err on the side of control, but at least they're striving for righteousness, purity, brotherhood. They're striving to follow the Bible. Then go to another church where anything goes. Nobody knows if you come or leave. You live your own life. You're not an open book. I had tried that, and I really wasn't interested in that kind of church. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's kind of a little bit of background about the church. That didn't answer your question, did it?
It answers the question, and I think readers will enjoy it. That's what I found was interesting. The way your church assigned the mentors and the discipleship, and I think too many times we all just kind of check the box on Sunday. I went to church, now I'm going to go watch football. And it sounds like your church really got you involved in really learning about the Bible and how to be a disciple of Christ. So
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were good at it, and I'm really proud of our church, what we've built up since, because I feel like, yes, we are still not perfect, but we've gotten rid of a lot of the control, and what's left is what I find a very earnest desire to get close to God, to help other people to know Him who are interested. So I'm really happy with our church. I think it's come a long way, but like any church, we have to be really careful that our zeal doesn't turn into arrogance, and our righteousness doesn't turn into legalism. Just like any church out there.
Right. Well, tell us a little bit about your writing process. I mean, do you have to have the kids gone, everything quiet, classical music playing, or somewhere where you have a beautiful view? I mean, what helps you get productive when you want to sit down and do some writing?
It does help to not have the kids around, because they will whoop and holler around the couch in front of me with the dog, and I really don't get much done that way. However, that is not always possible. When I can, I try to just have absolute silence, and I can't write for an extended period of time without losing my juice, Then I start to turn to more social media, connect with people on Facebook and all of that. But if I can get like a good hour, hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours of writing in where it's quiet, then I go to bed that night and I feel like this was a good day, right? I realize that if I do nothing else, writing is very important to me. If I've done that, then I'm happy with how the day went.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we probably are running out of time, and we don't want to go too long and keep you. I appreciate the time you've given us, but what is your hope as far as what do you really want a reader to take away from reading your book? What do you hope that your book accomplishes, now that you've got it done?
Okay. I hope that people will see how great God is. That is what I hope that people take away. That they will see how incredible God is. That you can go through horrific loss, and you can be in danger, and you can be struggling with personal issues like depression, and you can not be walking with God, and He is there, and He's reaching out all the time. And He's present, and He's never leaving, and He's never giving up, and He's just incredible. If my book could help people to feel that, then it's beyond my wildest dreams.
Well, that's what you mentioned a couple times in your book, that you were so amazed that God knew about your life and your struggles and what you were dealing with, and that's what I found enjoyable throughout it, was that you showed where God kept reaching out. You showed where He cared about your little problems. You talk about some of the miracles, the little prayers that you asked the Lord for help with, and suddenly the help occurred. Mm-hmm. And I found that to be very encouraging as I read the book. Mm-hmm. Now, you got in. What we want to know now is what's your next project? What's your next book?
Okay. I am about 8 chapters in on a nonfiction book, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this plot out. I'm not sure that no, not nonfiction, a fiction book, and I'm not sure that I can be a fiction writer. I actually would like to write more nonfiction stuff about God, the Bible. I write that on my blog, and I would like to write a book. I'm very interested in Bible studies, breaking it down, making it easy to understand. So that kind of stuff I'm interested in. But I also want to make sure that I'm inspired to be writing that, and I want to try my luck at fiction. Sorry, I keep saying nonfiction. I want to try my luck at fiction to see if I'm capable of it, kind of a self-challenge. So I'm about 8 chapters in. I'm still plugging away. I hope that will be the next book that comes out, and then probably after that I'll start maybe turning to some nonfiction. So that's where I'm at now.
Well, I can't imagine you not being good at any writing, especially if it needs to be described. And the way you can lay the scene out, I would think you'd be great at fiction as well as you were with the nonfiction. But here's the book again. I want to hold it up for everybody to see. A Lady in France. I couldn't believe that I actually read it. As you can tell, it is clearly marked a chick book by the flowers all over it. But I found it to be an extraordinary read, a very uplifting and encouraging book that challenged me to not only remember how much the Lord cares about me, but also to be a little more caring and understanding of other people in their situations as well. Now, did I miss anything? Is there any parting thoughts or anything that we missed that you'd like to cover or say?
No, just I can't thank you enough. Really, I just can't thank you enough for reading my book despite the all the signs saying no, and just for having me, for taking the time to interview me, and really just for your support. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll get it posted up on YouTube. You can share it with your friends, pass it around, and don't forget to go to the A Lady in France website and keep up with Jennie's blogging. I think you'll really, I know that I found her to be a very inspiring and enjoyable reader. Have a good day, and God bless you.
Thanks.